The life.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
The legacy.
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
The dream.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
13 ABC presents Martin Luther King Jr. Promise of the Dream. Brought to you by Buckeye Cable System. Now, here's Kristian Brown.
13 ABC celebrates the life and achievements of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Good evening, everyone. We begin with the one single act that fueled the civil rights movement. On December 1st, 1955, a seamstress by the name of Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man and moved to the back of the bus. This is that bus, and you can see it for yourself at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Her action was spontaneous. After a long day of work, Rosa Parks boarded this segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama on December 1st, 1955. The rule was the first 10 seats were reserved for whites, and if more whites were on the bus, the black passengers would have to move to the back.
All the other 3 passengers that were sitting in that row got up and moved as usual, and she just refused to get up. She said, the story is that she was tired of working, but really she was tired of segregation. She was tired of all the rules. She was tired of being forced to do things that didn't make her feel human.
Parks was arrested for violating Jim Crow laws, which segregated whites from blacks. The incident sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. 75% of the bus riders in Montgomery, Alabama were African American, so this boycott posed a serious financial threat to the company. The 13-month-long protest ended in 1956 with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses is unconstitutional. This bus sat unprotected for 30 years. Then in 2001, it was acquired by the Henry Ford Museum. The museum restored the windows and the seats, then placed it on exhibit in 2003.
Kids get here, and then there's a talk that goes on in here in Rosa Parks' own voice. She talks about what it felt like to do what she did, and you see kids get quiet. It's a very powerful object. It's amazing that we have it here at the Henry Ford. It's just such a wonderful way for people to learn, to talk with each other, to kind of be aware of what happened in the past and how it can still kind of affect our lives today.
Parents we spoke with say this exhibit provides teaching moments for children.
I think there's a lot of history there and a lot of great lessons that need to be taught to everybody. I think a big one is equality, and another one is standing up for what you believe in. I'm really big on that. You know, follow your dreams and your convictions and go with what you feel and never be afraid to take a stand for what's right.
My grandson and my daughter here with us, and they haven't experienced none of the stuff that my father and grandparents have experienced, so they should be a little bit more appreciative of what we are allowed to have and become today.
If you would like to see this bus for yourself, the Henry Ford Museum is open 7 days a week in Dearborn, Michigan. 2 local pastors have joined forces to talk about race and reconciliation over the pulpit. They're hoping to bring unity to our city. One African-American pastor says he still gets profiled and followed in stores.
Kids all grew up here.
Pastor Robert Culp is one of the most recognizable pastors in the city of Toledo. He started 3 shelters, founded a charter school, and even led the Toledo chapter of the NAACP for a time. Yet despite his notoriety, he says he's been racially profiled in stores and in banks.
One of the saddest things for me is the fact that I still have to think of myself as an African American before I can even think of myself as a Christian. You would think that that wouldn't be true for a clergyman, but in the United States, that's still a part of where we are.
Toledo has had 2 African-American mayors in recent years and now 2 police chiefs. Pastor Culp believes there are signs the city is moving in the right direction.
When you look at politics, you're obviously encouraged with a number of African Americans on the school board, down at City Hall, and in various positions.
And with Grope, Pastor Culp hopes healing will occur. But high-profile cases like the Trayvon Martin case reopen those wounds. That's the reason why Maumee pastor Tony Scott decided to preach about race and reconciliation over the pulpit. He began a series called The G Race at the church on Strayer.
You know, I wanted to see reconciliation. I didn't want to deal with the quote-unquote problem of racism. I wanted to deal with reconciliation. And it's always been in my heart as I read the Bible that he created one race, the human race. Jesus said, as my Father and I are one, I want you to be one.
G-Race was derived from the word grace and stands for God's race. The sermons are based on biblical teaching, which states how Jesus felt about discrimination, reconciliation, and unity.
And what if we could start a conversation here about racial reconciliation that would spread from here out into Ohio, into Michigan and Indiana and Kentucky and these other states? Couldn't God do something here that would go around the world? I think he can if we will just hear his voice and obey him.
Like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., these pastors are using biblical principles in hopes of bringing healing and unity to a city dubbed Holy Toledo. Pastor Culp and Pastor Scott have been friends for more than 20 years, sharing their experiences, hoping that others will do the same. When we come back, we'll have more from the Henry Ford Museum here in Dearborn, Michigan.
Coming up, learning the legacy.
He helped us be where we are now.
The weight of Dr. King's message on young students in Toledo.
In classrooms across the country, students are being encouraged to explore the connections between themselves and Dr. Martin Luther King through history. We spent the day at a local school talking about Dr. King's legacy. Students at Rosa Parks Elementary are learning about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement.
Dr. Martin Luther King is a civil rights leader who helped black and whites come together. The man who wanted freedom for everybody and wanted to be equal with the black and whites.
He was fighting for freedom and for people to get along.
He inspired me to get an education and go to college.
These books help tell the story of what it was like for blacks living in the South under Jim Crow laws. Whites and blacks were segregated in schools and other public places.
No black person could eat in a white person's restaurant or cafe. When young children marched, the police attacked them too. He accepted these arrests with dignity.
These children can't imagine being stripped of their freedoms or being beaten or jailed because of the color of their skin.
People should get along and love each other for who they are.
But they express deep gratitude to Dr. Martin Luther King for paving the way for them to enjoy those freedoms some lived without.
He helped us be where we are now.
Thank you, Dr. King.
Congress created the Museum of African American History and Culture back in 2003, and now the museum is finally taking shape. Washington Bureau Chief Jacqueline Policastro gives us a look inside to tell us what Dr. King's role will be in the museum.
The National Mall. This is the spot where Martin Luther King Jr. became known to the world through his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. Now, with this new museum that's still being built, many other African American heroes will have the chance to have their stories told and known around the world as well. These workers are laying the foundation for the museum that will hold the history of African Americans in our nation. They're pouring cement, laying tarps, and scaling beams, changing a plot of grassy land under the Washington Monument into the $500 million National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Their foreign visitors or American visitors will get a chance to understand the genesis of this community and its diversity.
John Franklin is a senior manager of the project. He's worked at the Smithsonian for 26 years and is the son of an historian.
For many years, the role of African Americans was left out of American history. And you can't really understand the breadth of our history without understanding the critical role of African Americans in shaping that history.
Franklin was a high school junior when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated.
When I come into college in the fall of '69, it is the class that has been admitted since King's assassination. And doors are opening that have been previously closed.
The senior project manager tells us he feels good about the new museum. It's top quality and right on schedule, expected to open in November of 2015.
We've really come a long way. I mean, we've made great progress as a country. And I think that's what's one of the exciting things about being part of this project and seeing these things happen and being able to contribute to something that'll be here forever.
Forever. From the moment our first African-American president broke ground on the museum,
this day has been a long time coming,
to exhibits that will document a chapter of our nation's history that has yet to be written. Reporting in Washington, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC, Action News.
It's the most riveting civil rights speech in American history.
I have a dream.
Saluting the promise of the dream when we return.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been 85 years old this year. In honor of his life, we revisit the I Have a Dream speech delivered in 1963 in Washington, D.C.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. One day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
That speech was given 51 years ago. It serves as a constant reminder of how far we've come and where we need to go. Thanks so much for joining us as 13 ABC salutes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm Kristian Brown.
Thank you for watching this special presentation. 13 ABC celebrates Martin Luther King Jr., the promise of the dream. Brought to you by Buckeye Cable System.